marvelous speaker here today. And let me see what we have here. So Amanda Sue, Reverend Amanda Sue, I studied with her, so I forget to say Reverend for me, and I forget to say Reverend for my friends too. But a Reverend Amanda Sue Briggs is an ordained unity minister who integrates spirituality and mental health to help people create happier, healthier lives. Her message is rooted in the belief that when we heal ourselves, we heal the world. And that's a great belief to have. She's known for her warmth and humor, and I can attest to that, and her authenticity. Amanda Sue walks beside people who are ready to question the beliefs that have shaped them and step into an understanding of themselves and their world. She is founder of the Unity Collective and has spoken at Unity communities throughout the United States and Canada. She lives in Cave Creek, Arizona, with her husband, their two girls, and their standard poodle, Theo. He's very adorable. So, Amanda Sue, welcome.
Thank you, Ripsy. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be back with you all.
Pleasure.
So when I first got my date from Revc for July 5th, I realized it was 4th of July weekend. And so I'm thinking out loud, walking around the house, talking to my husband about, well, it's 4th of July weekend, so I should do a theme of freedom, and maybe I should talk about this. I could go this direction. And I'm brainstorming out loud. And then I kind of look at him looking for that affirmation of like, yeah, sounds good, right? And he looks at me and he says, Ottawa is in Canada, right? And I kind of looking at him and he's kind of looking at me and I'm like, oh gosh, what an American thing to do. So forgive my Americanness, but we are talking about freedom today because once I started brainstorming on the topic, I really felt called to talk about it still. So what is freedom really? I know here in America we have a lot of thoughts about freedom, but freedom is a topic that's important for every single person, regardless of where you live. But I think sometimes we don't really stop to think, what does freedom really mean? Maybe you think freedom means having no boss, no one telling us what to do or who we have to be. Maybe freedom is the ability to chart our own path. Maybe for you right now, freedom would be not having to answer any more emails or do anything that I don't want to do. Teenagers, which we have two of them right now, they famously want their freedom, right? They want no rules. They can do whatever they want. They can go wherever they want, stay out all night, drive around with their friends, and not have any parents to report to. And then those teenagers become adults and they have that freedom that they wanted, right? And then they realize, well, someone had to work to make the money to pay for that car and to pay for that gas and to pay for the insurance so they could have that freedom of driving around all night. And I think even as adults, in many ways, we are still after and chasing freedom. We can feel trapped or boxed in by the constraints of things like money and time or obligations or trapped by our past choices or expectations. I think so often we think that freedom is something that is waiting for us on the other side of something. There's freedom on the other side of paying off debt, on the other side of the kids leaving home, the other side of finally having enough, enough time, enough saved, enough permission, enough whatever it is we think that we need to finally have that freedom that we're after. But what if? What if the thing that we're waiting to be free from was never really the thing keeping us stuck in the first place? The outside earthly definition of freedom is not being contained, not being restrained, not being limited by outside people or governments. And yet, almost every wisdom or spiritual tradition, almost every religion speaks about a completely different kind of freedom, a freedom of the soul, a rising above, this spiritual rebirth, this freedom from the shackles of these earthly constraints. Whether it's Hinduism's moksha or Buddhism's nirvana or Christianity's new life. These religions teach that following their teachings, that walking this spiritual path will lead to this ultimate freedom. Whether it's freedom from the cycle of death and rebirth of Hinduism, freedom from suffering in Buddhism, or freedom from sin in Christianity. What I find really interesting about this, about the way that spiritual traditions talk about spiritual freedom, this deeper or higher freedom, is that the things they claim to free us from, the things that walking the spiritual path frees us from, are natural conditions of life. In Hinduism, we're all subject to reincarnation. One of the 8 noble truths of Buddhism is that suffering is just part of the human condition. Christianity teaches that sin is inherent in the world. And yet these are the very things that they claim to free us from. And so it kind of makes you wonder if freedom then is not attained by removing some condition, but rather by an inner change. So it's not about removing the outer constraints, it's about realizing that inner power, that inner freedom. What's so interesting is in these same examples that I've given in Hinduism and Buddhism and Christianity, the thing, that inner change that needs to happen to realize freedom is basically the same. In Hinduism, it's realizing that Atman, which is our true individual self, and Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, what we might call God, that they're one and the same. And in Buddhism, it's about realizing that this individual self is an illusion. We're actually all one. And in Christianity, it's about identifying with Christ within over our limited human self or the ego. And in Unity, our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, he said that freedom is this sense of complete well-being. And that the way we achieve that true freedom is through regulating our life according to capital P principle. Now, by principle, Charles Fillmore means spiritual law, that higher truth, the spirit of the divine moving through us and as us. Essentially, what these other spiritual traditions are talking about as well, realizing that we are all one, that we are all connected, that there's so much more to us than just what we can see from our current limited human perspective. This freedom that Charles Fillmore talks about, the freedom that I think we're all really after, is a getting into the flow of life, aligning our actions with spiritual truth, regardless of how things may appear to be on the surface. That is how we then experience that complete freedom and that complete well-being that he's talking about. Okay, now this all sounds really good in theory, right? But how do we actually get there? Maybe I can get behind the idea that true freedom isn't about removing obstacles. It's something that's got to change within me. But then why does it still feel like there's always something that is keeping me from experiencing freedom, right? Why is there always something blocking my path? I was talking to a woman a little bit younger than me a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about this struggle that she went through, where she felt like her family really gave her this expectation that she needed to get married and have kids right away and serve her husband and, find her identity in being a wife, and that she struggled with that. For me, I always felt like the expectation that I got handed by my family wasn't that, but it was to be successful. I was told that I could be anything, that I could do anything I wanted, that I had so much potential. And people would say things like, oh my gosh, you're going to do such great things in life. And so the expectation was that I fulfill that great potential. And there was so much pressure to live up to this expectation that I started doing all of these things that I thought I was supposed to do without ever really stopping to check in to see if I even wanted any of it. I ran myself completely ragged, just trying to achieve and achieve and achieve and live up to the potential that I thought I was supposed to. So much so that I barely survived it. I found myself at 20 years old in a hospital bed. And my parents were by my side, and we were having this conversation about how much pressure I felt, how trapped I felt by their expectations for me. When my parents looked at me with tears in their eyes and they said, "Honey, those aren't our expectations, they're yours." You see, I wanted freedom from the world's expectations, but really what was keeping me stuck wasn't out there. It was right in here. I was putting the pressure on, holding the impossible standards for myself, setting those expectations. And through that experience, I started to realize how much of what caused me pain in my life was all because of this story that I made up in my mind and decided to believe. I wonder if any of you have ever believed a story of your own. Maybe something like, if I had more money in the bank, then I could take that risk and pursue that dream. Or a story like, if I didn't have this obligation that I have to do that's keeping me here, then I could finally move where I really want to move. Maybe it's a story of, well, if I would have gone to college and gotten that degree, then I would have permission to write that book, but no one would listen to me now. You see, sometimes when we feel stuck or trapped, like all we want is freedom to do and to be what we really want to do and be, we think that what is binding us is out there, but really it's in here. These are the shackles that we don't realize that we are wearing, the shackles of our own limiting beliefs and expectations. Whatever it is that you think is keeping you stuck is only a temporary earthly condition. In truth, we are already free because everything that we do is a choice. And I think that's really what spiritual freedom is the freedom to choose. Having the freedom to choose doesn't mean that our actions don't have consequences, right? We live in a world of cause and effect. And those consequences, those effects, it can be a positive thing or a negative thing, right? The consequence or the effect of the cause of practicing gratitude, the consequence is that you find more to be grateful for. So our actions have consequences, both good and bad. But what it means to be free to choose is that it means we have space to choose our response rather than reacting from ego or fear or selfish desire. I think all of us have probably had a time in our life where we reacted rather than responded. And I think that's what this spiritual path gives us. When we start to recognize the spiritual freedom, it gives us that space where we're not completely identified with me, 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 me. And I can choose a response rooted in love, rooted in capital T truth, rooted in capital P principle, rising above the trappings of our ego mind, or what the Fillmores called sense consciousness, what the Bible calls the flesh, rising above the limitations of thinking that we are only human, only in this one life. So I studied psychology and I'm a big fan of neuroscience. And so did you know that the sweet little human brain that we have, it loves consistency and predictability. It wants everything to stay the same because that feels safe. So when we decide that we want to change something, that we want to grow, our brain actually actively works against us because it doesn't like the newness. It doesn't want the change. This earthly brain is designed to keep us safe and small and completely concerned with me, me, me. Our brain wants us to keep doing the same thing that we've always done because that's what it's always done. And so we keep getting the same result, right? Keep doing what you've always done. You keep getting the same result. And that is what our brain is designed to do. But we also have a spiritual mind. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about divine mind and exercising those 12 powers. They're all faculties of our spiritual mind. And that mind transcends the limitations of the flesh. And by working in harmony with spiritual law, by keeping our focus on things above, we may begin to find that a lot of the chains we thought were binding us, they aren't even there at all. We begin to see options we had never considered before. We put on this new understanding, and it is our spiritual mind that then allows us to break that cycle of stuckness, to experience freedom and complete well being and peace. Psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl has this famous quote you've probably heard before. He says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." You see, this spiritual freedom isn't about being free from the law of cause and effect. It's not being free from consequences or free from ever having to do anything we don't want to do. The freedom is having the space to choose the cause, to choose the actions that are in alignment with the effect or the outcome that we want to create, that are in alignment with spiritual truth, with love and harmony. You ever notice that there's a little bit of a like a paradox with freedom? You know, to realize more freedom, we often have to employ discipline, which discipline can almost feel like the opposite of freedom, but it's not. You know, to have the freedom to be able to run long distances or keep up with the grandkids or hike that mountain, to have the freedom to do those things, we have to have the discipline to train our body to be able to sustain us while doing those things, right? To have the freedom of buying something that we really want or giving to causes that we care about or pursuing a new calling without the financial stress. To have those freedoms, we have to have the discipline to work and to save money and to invest wisely. So, to know true spiritual freedom, we have to be disciplined in how we use our mind. For the Fillmores, this path was all about spending time in what they called the silence, that deep space in meditation where your sense of self kind of dissolves. You feel connected to that divine mind. You feel limitless and expansive. Has anybody been there in meditation before? Spending time in the silence, spending ample time focused on and in communion with God. That's what the Fillmores taught as the way that we discipline and use our mind to its truest capabilities. Because it is through our mind that we can truly come to know divine mind and to put to good use these spiritual faculties, all from training our mind to choosing where do we put our focus, our energy, our belief. How will I direct these incredible powers of my mind? Will I direct them toward discord or to harmony? Will I choose to spend time and energy being upset at the bad or grateful for the good? Will I use my mind to imagine all of the worst case scenarios that could happen? Or will I use my mind to trust that next right step that I feel and that I know? Am I choosing to hide and to ignore what life is showing me? Like those toddlers covering my ears, la, 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 I can't hear you. Or am I choosing to pay attention? Am I choosing to say yes to God's plan for my life? Will I use the power of my mind to make excuses of all the reasons I can't? Or will I lean on my power of strength and be brave? Am I choosing my ego's urgency or spirit's timing? Am I choosing faith or fear? To hold on to that hurt because it makes me feel righteous and justified. Look what they did. Or will I use the power of my mind to forgive and to release? Will I use my mind to keep making chains or to remember that I am already free? In the Christian scriptures in Galatians 5:1, it says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." I think that wording's so interesting. Do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. So maybe it's not more money in the bank or fewer obligations or a different set of circumstances. Maybe that's not what we need. Maybe freedom never was on the other side of something that you're waiting for. Maybe true freedom is remembering you are already free. Free to choose where you put your energy, free to choose where you direct the power of your mind. We are free to choose our response, to set our minds on spiritual truth. And we stand firm, never again creating new mental chains to bind us and keep us stuck. Because when we know the truth, you know the saying, the truth sets us free. And so it is.
The recording has stopped.